Life-threatening floods hit parts of Texas's hill country as the Guadalupe River swells and flood emergencies and warnings go out. We'll have the latest today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. In the aftermath of shootings in Maine and Texas, a pause in ICE policy ends only hours after the change went in effect. More from Houston's historic East End on how the shooting has galvanized residents there. Also, the death of a Dallas Cowboy ruled as suicide by officials, sparking a deeper conversation into the role of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Plus, religion and Texas culture. A new book untangles an unexpectedly deep and often misunderstood connection. Those stories and a whole lot more today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on the 16th day of July, 2026. I'm David Brown. Let's get right to our top story, life-threatening flooding in parts of the Texas Hill Country. Especially hard hit that very same area where deadly floodwaters ravaged a camp along the Guadalupe River near Kerrville just over 1 year ago. Over the past 24 hours, water rescues have been escalating, and as we go to air on this Thursday, there are flash flood emergencies in effect for Kerr and Uvalde counties, with widespread road closures. The governor has issued a warning that flooding is likely to break records. Here to tell us more is Mary Wasson. She's a meteorologist with the Austin American-Statesman. Mary, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Echoes of the 2025 disaster, most certainly. We know there are many rescues underway. Any known casualties from this latest round of flooding?
We do not. I do have some information that water was in second level of homes and they were doing evacuations, but I have not heard anything more outside of that.
Have you heard about the possibility of shelter-in-place orders in Kerrville? Is that something that you can confirm?
They have said, if you're not being affected, stay where you are. But if you notice that the water is rising, get out immediately and move to higher ground. So they're urging people, like, if they see the water, go ahead and move. But if not, just shelter in place.
Even with what happened last year, people are surprised, astonished in some cases at how rapidly the Guadalupe River has risen, something like 16 feet in a half hour, just an incredible rise. The epicenter of this flooding, a place known as Flash Flood Alley, right?
Right, that's correct. Flash Flood Alley is basically along and west the I-35 corridor, which includes the hill country, just because we don't have a lot of soil depth there. And then, of course, the elevation changes and all the rivers and tributaries, all that just kind of combines to form Flash Flood Alley. You are correct that the waters have risen very rapidly. I was just looking at the Comfort, the river gauge there at the Guadalupe River at Comfort, and it's up to 37 feet. And last year, during the July 4th floods, it was at 34 feet. So we are actually higher now than we were a year ago in that area. So that's what prompted that flash flood emergency.
I noticed that the governor mentioned earlier his remarks about the possibility that flooding is likely to break records. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Yes, it's not in the exact same area like Kerrville, but I mean, it's the same river, of course, right? So it's a little further south than that, but it could break records. Last year, the Guadalupe crested at 37 and a half feet. We're already at 37 feet. So something we're going to be watching closely for the next several hours.
Help us with the map there. You say a little further downriver. We talking about areas like you mentioned Comfort, Bernie, that area?
Not yet into Bernie, but yeah, that's kind of where all the water is flowing. So we'll have to watch those areas very closely. We also just got a flash flood emergency for the Pedernales River, which included Johnson City and the Blanco County area. So that's also being impacted.
What can people expect in coming hours and days? Is the rain going to stop anytime soon?
Well, we are still dealing with that upper low that's kind of spinning out, and each night it's going to kind of reform. So what's falling today will slowly move towards the west. So we're not completely done with the flooding across the hill country, or at least the rain, but it will start pushing more westward and kind of lessening as we head towards the weekend. But yeah, we still have a couple more days of this.
Mary Wasson, meteorologist with the Austin American-Statesman. Thanks so much for the update, Mary.
Yes, thank you so much.
A brief pause on one of the most controversial enforcement tactics used by immigration and customs enforcement agents appears to be over almost as soon as it began, less than a day after the Department of Homeland Security told agents to temporarily stop most ICE-initiated traffic stops. President Trump said the tactic should continue, calling traffic stops one of ICE's most effective law enforcement tools. The pause followed two fatal ICE shootings in the span of a week, one on Monday in Maine, where agents shot and killed a Colombian man during an enforcement operation there. Days earlier in Houston, ICE agents shot and killed 52-year-old Lorenzo Salgado Araujo. The Department of Homeland Security says agents stopped his white work van because someone inside resembled the target of an immigration operation, and that the agent fired in self-defense. Family members and witnesses dispute that account, and the DHS Inspector General has opened an investigation. The shooting has rattled Houston's historic East End and galvanized many in the city's Latino community. Houston Public Media's Michael Atkinson spoke with residents and historians about how the neighborhood's history is shaping its response. How the neighborhood's history is changing its response.
At the corner of Canal and Wayside in Houston's East End neighborhood, it's hard to miss the orange walls of La Michoacana Meat Market. It's where Carlos Rebollar, a pastor in the area, buys meat for his family.
This is where one of the most common places that we come buy our fajita, our ribs for our carne asadas.
Born in Mexico, he spent most of his life living in the Houston area without legal immigration status. He became a U.S. citizen in 2017 and has lived in East End for more than a decade.
I began to search its history, found a lot of just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful parts of this history that to me meant a lot as an immigrant.
Including some of the community's history of activism and its struggle for Latino representation and advocacy.
We've always been having to jump over extra obstacles and hurdles just to establish a life here.
Just across the street from the market is where a federal immigration officer shot and killed a man named Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, who had been living in the U.S. for decades without permanent legal status. No video of the shooting itself has surfaced. The Department of Homeland Security says immigration officers weren't wearing body cameras. But cell phone videos posted online and security cameras from nearby businesses obtained by news outlets depict the moments before and after the shooting. That's how Rebollar found out about the killing.
When I saw Lorenzo's face, I saw my dad's face. Same skin color hue, same hardworking shoulders and hands. My dad works in construction. My dad is a contractor. My dad picks up his workers. And so it hit really close to home.
Crucial details surrounding his killing have been sparse, prompting protests and calls for transparency from Houstonians.
ICE out of Houston! ICE out of Houston!
Last week, hundreds of protesters marched in Salgado Araujo's memory. Rebollar led a prayer vigil in Spanish.
Te pedimos todo esto en el nombre poderoso de Jesús. Amén y amén.
U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, officials claim Salgado Araujo had tried to run over an officer, but others in the car that day dispute that. Across the street from La Michoacana, where Salgado Araujo was killed, a memorial has grown in the days since the shooting, flowers and candles spilling onto the curb. Katia Di Stefano added her own flowers.
I just felt like I didn't want to come empty-handed.
She and her husband had just bought a house near East End and are moving into a community that is wounded.
This one just hit deeper than usual because it is my hometown and I am an immigrant. People just come here for a better opportunity, and we need to really embrace that.
Part of the appeal of the East End, Di Stefano says, is the history of the neighborhood. At the turn of the 20th century, Mexicans and Latinos were recruited to move to Houston, including this area, after oil was struck and the Port of Houston became a vital asset to the state.
Those two things are really critical for the growth of Houston.
Jose Aranda is a Latin American studies professor at Rice University.
But you need labor for all that, and corporations love cheap labor.
Aranda, who also grew up in East End's Magnolia Park neighborhood, said the population of both documented and undocumented immigrants grew drastically over the span of a decade. Each of the barrios, or neighborhoods east of downtown Houston, adopted unique characteristics from one another.
There's all this business, my barrio's better than your barrio kind of thing. So, but, growing up in the 60s and 70s, we were in the shadow of Jim Crow segregation.
Enter the Chicano movement, which sought to unify Latinos and get better education access, increased political representation, and better standards of living. That brought the East End neighborhoods together as one community.
I think a lot of people in the East End feel a loyalty and a regard for that moment of Mexican-American activism.
The movement reached an apex in the spring of 1977 when the body of a Mexican-American man named Jose Campos Torres turned up in the Buffalo Bayou, beaten and bruised.
The shroud of secrecy that is hanging over this case, what exactly happened between Torres and Denson at Friday morning at 1 o'clock, is about as clear as the waters of Buffalo Bayou.
Torres was arrested at a bar in the East End, taken away by Houston police officers, and was beaten and thrown into the bayou where he drowned. 2 of the 6 officers were charged with murder, but were convicted of negligent homicide and sentenced to a year's probation.
Stop killing us!
That drew protests in Houston on the 1-year anniversary of his killing, eventually resulting in the massive Moody Park riot in North Houston.
A police officer was just run down.
Dozens were arrested, many others were injured. The legacy of that year, between Campos Torres' killing and the Moody Park riot, defined much of the Latino activist community in Houston, even up to today, with the killing of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo.
That could have easily been me.
That's Houstonian Janie Torres. The shooting struck a nerve with her. She was all too familiar with killing at the hands of law enforcement. Her brother was Jose Campos Torres, who was beaten and drowned by police 50 years ago.
In 2026, we are still looked at the same. No difference, just different times. Plain and simple.
After she heard of Salgado Araujo's killing last week, Janie visited the place he was killed, less than a mile from where her own brother was picked up by police half a century ago. The killing of Salgado Araujo has shaken the East End community. Residents spoke of a general fear of going out, but many of them, like Janie Torres, say they themselves are not afraid.
I'm not scared because I'm going to stand up for what I believe in.
At a vigil for Salgado Araujo's memory, East End resident Geneva Rajput calls this a moment for unity.
So, guys, we got to stay together, we got to stick together, and we got to know that if we do nothing, nothing's going to change.
Rajput, who lives a mile from where the shooting happened, spoke with me the next day.
This incident that took place is going to be known all over the world, that my little barrio was able to make a big difference.
I'm Michael Atkinson in Houston.
After a quick break for our station statewide, much more of the Texas Standard just ahead. Stay with us.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Round Rock ISD Virtual Academy, offering virtual and hybrid classes for self-motivated high schoolers throughout Texas, with more than 50 courses, including advanced placement and dual credit. roundrockisd.org/virtual academy.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. The death of former Dallas Cowboys defensive end Marshawn Kneeland has renewed attention on chronic trauma encephalopathy, or CTE. Kneeland died last November at the age of 24. Authorities ruled his death a suicide. More recently, researchers at Boston University's CTE Center announced that he had stage 1 CTE, a degenerative brain disease associated with repetitive head impacts. Researchers stress that a CTE diagnosis alone cannot explain why someone dies by suicide, but the finding has renewed questions about what scientists know and what they still don't know about the disease. Joining us now is Dr. Kevin Biniak. He is Associate Professor at UT Health San Antonio. Dr. Biniak, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hey, David. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise. First, we should dig a little deeper on what CTE is, what's happening in the brain, and how does repetitive head trauma lead to that disease?
Yeah, so CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a neurodegenerative disease, similar to other neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Lewy body disease, ALS. But CTE is a specific disease that is both chronic and progressive. It leads to the death of cells in the brain called neurons. And unlike maybe some of the other diseases that I named, there's a very strong relationship in CTE with repetitive head impacts. So these are injuries sustained to your brain, oftentimes earlier in life, and most often through activities like contact or collision sports.
Researchers found that Marshawn Neeland had stage 1 CTE. What does that diagnosis tell researchers? And just as importantly, what can it not tell us about his health or behavior?
Yeah, so CTE is a disease that is diagnosed after death, postmortem. It involves a brain autopsy where researchers will take the brain out and study it, examine the features of the brain, and ultimately get tissue on a microscopic slide so we can examine it and look for key features of this disease. So in this instance, for Mr. Neeland, he had a stage 1 CTE where there is pathology in the brain. It's called microtubule-associated protein tau. This pathology was in the frontal lobes of the brain, and it was at the depths of the folds of the brain. And that is consistent with the diagnosis of stage 1. As the disease can become more severe, it can spread to other areas of the brain, and it can start involving other areas that can lead to different types of symptoms.
I know that this is going to be, certainly for the medium of radio, a little bit too difficult to go through all of the stages, but I'm curious if you can explain what the stages represent. Does stage 1 necessarily mean someone would have noticeable symptoms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So stage 1 is kind of the earliest phase of this disease where it's a disease that can be very focal and patchy. But generally, there are only 1 or 2 kind of isolated lesions in the frontal lobe of the brain. As it progresses to stage 2, we will start to see larger lesions, more evolved in other structures, and eventually spreading to deeper areas of the brain, structures with names like the hippocampus and the thalamus and the brainstem. But at stage 1, this is a diagnosis that we can see in people that are younger with this disease. So typically, if we're getting the brain from somebody in their 20s or maybe 30s, we more often see stage 1. And early stage CTE pathology is often associated with some of these what are called neurobehavioral features of CTE. So these are the impulsivity, the rage, violent outbursts, different psychiatric diseases like depression or anxiety. Those are often associated with limited kind of stage 1 CTE pathology.
But unless I misunderstood you, one of the biggest frustrations here is that CTE can only be definitively diagnosed after death. And I'm wondering how close researchers are to being able to identify it in living patients.
This is a disease that has a protein called tau, similar to Alzheimer's disease. So one of the nice things about this disorder is that because of some of the similarities to Alzheimer's disease, we can take advantages of some of the developments that have happened in Alzheimer's disease and use them for athletes and others that might have a CT diagnosis. So we are getting closer. There are blood tests now for Alzheimer's disease, and we are trying to take those same blood tests and study in CTE. And there are radioligands or imaging tracers that we can give somebody and then look at the brain and try and spot the CTE pathology through a tracer. So some of the tools that we use in other diseases like Alzheimer's disease, they can be applied to CTE. And we're trying to do that to understand how we can maybe repurpose some of these tools for this diagnosis.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that over the years we've learned that it's not simply diagnosed concussions that matter, but the cumulative effect of repetitive head impacts. And I'm wondering how the science has evolved on that point.
Absolutely. So this is actually a disease that dates back almost 100 years, started in boxers in what was described as dementia pugilistica. But then over the past 15, 20 years, there's been more recognition that this is a disease beyond boxing. And it's been noticed in primarily in football players, but in other sports as well. Other activities that lead to repetitive head impacts. So military exposure, domestic violence, or intimate partner violence. It is linked to repetitive head injuries, however that source may be sustained. But what we've learned is there are stronger connections between the more an individual participates in a sport and gets repetitive head impacts than individual concussions alone. There are people that might not have had a concussion, but have played a sport for a long time and ended up with CTE.
I know certainly parents who refuse to let their kids play on, football teams as their kids are growing up. And obviously Texas has one of the largest youth football cultures in the country. And a lot of these decisions are being made on the basis of what they're hearing in the media. And I'm curious, given what's known today, what practical steps can parents, coaches, schools take to reduce the risk without discouraging participation in sports?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the best medicine is preventative medicine. I think from a policy standpoint, identifying the activities that put athletes at greatest risk for sustaining head impacts is one such thing. I look at, changing kickoffs as an example, or limiting contact in practice. I think the alternatives, flag football and the growth of other, team sport alternatives that
soccer, I've noticed for sure. Yeah,
exactly. But I think, aside from kind of the policy standpoint, I think anything that is limiting or reducing head impacts is a positive step in the right direction. So, better mouth guards, better helmets, and ultimately, I think just treating the head injuries like you would an orthopedic injury, giving the brain time to rest and heal, being aware and looking for athletes that have sustained head injuries, identifying them and pulling them from play, and then allowing them to heal before returning to play. I think all of those things make meaningful impacts in terms of improving brain health for athletes.
Dr. Kevin Bieniak is Associate Professor at UT Health San Antonio. Dr. Bieniak, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us on The Standard.
Thank you so much for having me, David. My pleasure.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Casa. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a Texas-based workers' compensation provider committed to providing care and support for injured employees. More at texasmutual.com/TexansDeliver.
In the Texas newsroom, I'm Shelby Rose. Catastrophic flooding has returned to the Texas Hill Country. The Guadalupe River has risen 32 feet overnight, sending a massive wave downriver.
Very high rainfall rates, 4 to 6 inches per hour in some of these fills. And that activity is just persisting through the morning hours. So just advise folks to just travel is highly discouraged.
Governor Abbott says this storm system is on par with the deadly 4th of July floods.
I want to give you a comparison. The 4th of July floods last year had rainfall of 20.29 inches. The expected rainfall during this rainstorm is expected to be more than 30 inches.
There were at least 75 water rescues reported yesterday, with numerous more taking place this morning across the Hill Country. The same storm system spawned a tornado that went through the northern parts of San Antonio yesterday. San Antonio Fire Chief Valerie Frosto says it damaged a student apartment complex near the University of Texas at San Antonio.
Much of the damage consists of storefronts, roof damage, signage, a lot of debris, and downed trees.
Plus, Camp Mystics owners have moved one wrongful death lawsuit over last year's deadly Hill Country flood to federal court and are trying to move 4 others. The Texas Newsroom's Lucio Vasquez reports.
The families that are suing accuse Camp Mystic of failing to protect their children during the flood, which killed 25 campers and 2 counselors. A state court hearing for one of those cases was originally scheduled for Wednesday, but it was canceled after Camp Mystic successfully argued that the lawsuits are tied to the camp's ongoing bankruptcy and should be handled in federal court. Attorneys for the families disagree and say they plan to ask a federal judge to send their case back to state court. The lawsuits have largely been on hold ever since the popular all-girls summer camp filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last month. I'm Lucio Vasquez in Houston.
And the Collin County Democratic Party has filed a voter fraud complaint against Attorney General Ken Paxton. KERA's Dylan Duke reports Paxton is accused of voting from an old address.
The Texas Tribune and ProPublica reported this month Paxton voted in 6 elections over the past 2 years using the address of a Collin County home he may no longer live in. The Collin County Democratic Party called Paxton's actions voter fraud in a complaint to the Texas Secretary of State. The agency will review the complaint and forward it to the Attorney General's office. KERA has reached out to the office with questions about how that complaint will be handled since it involves Paxton. Paxton's U.S. Senate campaign spokesperson told KERA the report is a, quote, partisan hit piece. I'm Dylan Duke in Dallas.
You're listening to statewide news from public radio stations across Texas. This coverage is only possible because of support from listeners like you. You can help sustain and grow Texas news coverage by donating to your local public radio station today.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm Angela Kocherga. An announcement by Sony that it will end production of games on physical discs has sent shockwaves through the PlayStation community. Even in a gaming world that's dominated by digital distribution, fans and industry watchers took note. Some call the change inevitable. Others lament the loss of a medium where users have more control of what they own. Our tech expert, Omar Gallaga, has been following it all, and he's here with the scoop. Omar, welcome back.
Hi, Angela. Thanks for having me.
Well, why is Sony abandoning physical discs?
Well, according to Sony, it's due to sales. They say that only 15% of their sales of games are physical copies, the discs that you would see in the store or order, from your retailer, and that 85% of full game software sales are digital. People buying them online and downloading them. But there's been an outcry. There's been a lot of blowback from gamers who don't want these physical discs to go away.
So what is the economic impact for Sony?
Well, that's part of it. Is that what this allows Sony to do is to kind of curtail that sort of resale of games. If you have a copy of a game on disc, you can take it to GameStop and sell it. You can give it, sell it to someone. You can't really do that with a digital copy. You can't really transfer games in that way or resell them. What you're getting when you buy a digital copy of a video game is a license to use it. You don't really even own it. So that's kind of a big distinction among gamers who feel that at any point Sony could just disappear your games. They could just take them away from your ownership, and that has already happened with some of the movies and TV shows that Sony used to sell online. They have just removed some of those where you can't even access them anymore, even if you bought them a few years ago. But this is also sort of an inevitable march of technology. People are not buying the discs or using the discs as much, and the next version of the Xbox is also likely not to have a disk drive included with it.
Well, as you said, fans of games on disc value the ability to buy or sell or trade the games. Are there other reasons that physical games are so popular?
Some of it is preservation. There's been a lot of talk about whether games are going to survive if the publishers go out of business or if the publishers are no longer supporting games. I mean, there's a huge movement to archive these games to make sure that they continue to be available long after the time when the studios are supporting them. And if they're just not available in any kind of physical form where they can be accessed, if those servers that hold those downloads no longer exist or function, where do those games go? So I think there's a lot of worry that you buy a game now, in 10 years, are you still going to be able to download it? Are you still going to be able to get access to it? If you lose it, or you get a new console, your old console breaks. I think for gamers, there's a concern that if I don't have the game in my hand, do I really own it? And am I always going to be able to access it?
Yeah, all good questions. So gamers are circulating a petition asking Sony to change its mind. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there's a petition on change.org that already has, last I checked, 317,000 plus verified signatures. There's been 12,961 comments just talking about it. So yeah, it's raising a lot of ire among gamers who are worried about this, who want Sony to backtrack on this. And Sony was one of the original supporters of the Blu-ray format. Like, they sort of pushed for this, for their format of disc to be the thing. And there's also a lot of talk about, for collectors. A lot of collectors like having the physical copy on their shelves where they can display them. We've got these very deluxe kind of steel box editions of games, and those might go away. And right now, the biggest upcoming game is Grand Theft Auto 6. Gamers were upset because the physical copy of Grand Theft Auto 6 is just going to be a code in a box. There's not even going to be a disc or any kind of physical component. It's just going to be, here, go download it.
So this comes at a time when console prices are on the rise and there are massive layoffs in Microsoft's Xbox unit. Why is gaming struggling?
Rising prices is part of it. I think people can no longer afford some of these consoles because the component prices are rising. We've talked before on this show about the price of RAM, of memory is going up. So that in turn is making the console prices go up. This generation of games, the leading titles are up to about $80 for some of the leading game titles, up from, $50, $60 just a few years ago. So I think gamers are being more choosy in what first-party games they buy. The AAA games that are most popular, they can only afford to buy a handful of them, whereas before they might have purchased more. So I think they're looking for alternatives. They're looking for cheaper games, online-only games on PC, if they already have a system. So I think game consoles are in a bit of a danger zone right now with everything that's happening.
Omar Gallaga's hanging on to his physical game discs, at least for now. He writes about tech for CNET and joins us here each week on The Standard. Omar, thank you.
I sure appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UT San Antonio, a Carnegie Tier 1 public research institution, and designated as Texas's National Institute on Aging Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. More at utsa.edu.
It's not just about the brisket or the ribs or the sausage or even the sides. It's the culture and people who are passionate about it. Where there's smoke, there's Daniel Vaughn, Texas Monthly Barbecue Editor. Join us next Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Where There's Smoke comes from H-E-B.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. For generations, religion has helped shape Texas politics, education, culture, even the way others think about Texas, our own identity. But that story didn't begin with megachurches or the religious right. It stretches back thousands of years through indigenous cosmologies, Spanish missions, immigration revivalism, constant debates over the role of faith in public life. There's a new book that traces that long arc and argues that understanding Texas means understanding its religious history. Joseph Locke is the author of One State Under God, A History of Religion in Texas. Professor, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Tell me about that title. That carries a lot of weight there, One State Under God. Do I recognize that from our state pledge?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a clause that was inserted into the state Pledge of Allegiance a little under 20 years ago. It was challenged in the court, and when it went to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, it was upheld, and the appeals court said that it was because it was a statement that reflected the state's religious history, its religious heritage. And so what I wanted to do with this book was kind of put that to the test, to look at this world that we're familiar with. We're constantly being bombarded by these sensationalistic headlines about religion in public life, and see what Texas religion looks like when we expose it to the light of history. And in this case, yes, a much longer history.
Yeah.
I go all the way back 13,000 years. Really, I mean, when you look at Texas history on a large enough timeline, Christianity has only been in Texas for a few hundred years, and the history of human habitation of Texas it stretches far past into what we sometimes call prehistory. And during that time, we certainly weren't one state under God. We were one state under many gods.
I think someone listening to us now might think, well, we do have this separation of religion and state that, is in the U.S. Constitution. And a lot of people, no pun intended, consider that a rather sacred line that the founders drew. By making the assertion that you can't understand Texas without understanding its religion, I can imagine some people sort of feeling put off by that, especially people who are irreligious themselves.
Well, that's interesting. And one of the points I do want to make in this book is that to understand its religious history, you also do have to understand a history of irreligion. I think sometimes we can have this idea of Texas as it's part of the Bible Belt. It's defined by Christian nationalist politics. And when you look far enough back, you notice that that world is relatively recent. It's kind of a historical anomaly into a history that's much more diverse. It's much more contested. It's a constantly evolving, contentious world. And if you go far back enough, you'll see that religion itself looks very different. Christianity looks very different. Its traditions, its practices all look very different, and in some ways wouldn't be entirely recognizable in the 21st century.
And so where do you mark the beginning of that intersection of religion in Texas? How do you set that up?
Well, the book is organized in a series of semi-chronological topical chapters. And so really it's not one single story. It's not one single turning point, but it's a series of turning points. You can point to the establishment of Catholic missions in the Spanish period. You can point to the arrival of evangelical revivalists in the 19th century. I emphasize a turning point in the late 19th and early 20th century as Texas industrializes and you get this kind of more assertive Christian politics. But really the kind of modern conception we sometimes have of this kind of like combative culture war Christianity is really a product of the last several decades, a kind of a political movement that erupts after the 1960s and into the 1970s and really begins to inject itself into Texas life. But if you look at a long enough history of Texas, you notice that at many times religion does not really rule over Texas. For much of its history, you would not think of Texas as the Bible Belt. If you had told a Texan before the Civil War that phrase, which hadn't really been coined yet, they would not have thought of Texas. Texas had a reputation as a relatively irreligious place. Religious adherence was relatively low. Churches, there were not as many churches per capita in Texas as there was elsewhere. And so this history that we think about, this kind of late 20th, early 20th century of Texas as emblematic of the Bible Belt is, like I said, a relatively recent historic vintage.
Yeah, and what struck me was how many larger-than-life characters come up in this book. I mean, from, J. Frank Norris, David Koresh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Texas is full of these incredibly colorful religious characters. You mentioned J. Frank Norris, pastor of First Baptist Fort Worth, who really was perhaps one of the most forceful fundamentalists in the early 20th century, who grew one of the first really true mega churches and really pioneered this idea of kind of fundamentalist culture war. He was opposed to Catholicism, alcohol, you name it. J. Frank Norris is infamous for shooting a man to death in his own office, going to trial, and only emerging stronger for it. But Texas is full of these characters. In Waco, William Cowper Brand founds the Iconoclast magazine, this free-thinking publication that gets a circulation of more than 100,000, is read all over the world, and is really kind of like a predecessor of somebody like H.L. Mencken. He's constantly satirizing Baptists. He's constantly making fun of Baylor until he himself is killed on a Waco street. And you move forward in the 20th century, you get all sorts of characters. Atheists like Madalyn Murray O'Hair, some of the forerunners of the religious right, folks like James Robeson, and into the 21st century.
What do you think people tend to get wrong about religion in Texas?
I think there are several things. One is its history is far more diverse than people give it credit for it. Like I said, I think people read the kind of Bible Belt back and assume it's always been this bastion of Baptists and Methodists and evangelicals. And then even today, I think people perhaps underrepresent how rapidly the demographics are changing. If you look at statistics for Texas today, you notice things are changing very rapidly. The share of the population that is Christian is plummeting. The share that affiliates with no tradition at all is rising. We're still very much a Christian state. Roughly 2/3 of the state identifies as a Christian, but things have really been changing rapidly over the last several decades.
And yet at the same time, I mean, if you think about some of the headlines that come to mind, Bible stories are going to become required reading in our schools soon. What does it mean for you as a scholar to cover religion right now? You think we're at another sort of turning point?
I think we're certainly at an interesting moment in the history of religion in Texas. You see this with the national attention paid to James Tallarico's candidacy this year. You see this with the constant new educational policies that have been gripping headlines over the last several years. But it's hard to say. I mean, a lot of this is the culmination of a long process of the politicization of Protestant Christianity, especially, but Christianity more broadly in Texas, that's played out over the course, especially of the second half of the 20th century and the early 21st century. but it's really hard to forecast where this is going to go. You see some of the rising religious diversity in Texas with the rise of Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhist populations. And you see the rise of anti-Islamic politics that have been pretty rampant in this state over the last 25 years. You notice religion is fulfilling this dynamic recently in which politicization and religious adherence are really kind of become intertwined and inseparable, but it's hard to know whether that's sustainable in the long term given changing demographics.
This is fascinating reading. Joseph L. Locke is Associate Professor of History at the University of North Texas and author of One State Under God, A History of Religion in Texas. Professor, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for talking about it with us on the Texas Standard. We certainly do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Support for Texas Standard comes from HEB and the My HEB app, which is available for download, and shopping fresh departments like seafood, produce, bakery, and deli, and scheduling curbside pickup or home delivery. More at heb.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Texas has some of the nation's most restrictive policies on syringe exchange programs, but for nearly 2 decades, Kerr County has been the lone exception, operating the state's only legislatively authorized needle exchange program. Its goal is to help prevent the spread of HIV, hepatitis, and other infections among people who inject drugs. Lawmakers have repeatedly considered bills that would allow other Texas counties to operate similar programs, but none have become law. Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies has more.
Every Wednesday on San Antonio's west side, the Corazon Ministries Street Outreach Team sets up for needle exchange. It's an anonymous one-for-one trade. For 2 hours, drug users line up with bags, boxes, and other containers to turn in their used syringes and receive new clean ones. They're also offered naloxone, also known as Narcan, a treatment that can rapidly reverse the effects of a life-threatening opioid overdose. The team also offers condoms, Band-Aids, a cold bottle of water, and a sandwich. Clients drop the used syringes into a bright orange medical disposal bin, which by the end of the day is full. Outreach worker and recovery coach Mark Rodriguez asked what kind of syringes they want. Some have long or short needles.
It depends on where they're at, and it depends on how their veins are. Some people a lot of people, as you see, the 29s, they love them because they're easier on their vein.
Rodriguez, who is also a peer support specialist, says he sees the same faces at the exchange every week. People will frequently use 30 syringes over the course of a week. Some need more.
Like some people use 3 needles or more a day, you know what I mean? So it don't last that long.
He says if people didn't have access to a clean needle exchange, they would keep using, but they would make different choices.
Reuse or share, yeah. And every time you use a needle, it bends at the tip every time, so it's harder on the vein.
UT Health San Antonio's Diana Cavazos leads the street nursing team. She says every used syringe brought in is one less discarded in the local parks or on the street.
I have noticed when we go and do outreach, or we go to encampments, or we go to empty parking lots, I no longer have to be over vigilant to see where I step because there were needles everywhere.
Those in line at the exchange told me they understand that this program has an overall health benefit for them and the community. How does the needle exchange help you?
It's good because turn in your old needles and get new needles. It's convenient.
Is it better than,
Yeah, it's a lot better. And it's healthier, a lot healthier.
Data from the Centers for Disease Control backs that up. The CDC estimates that syringe exchanges are associated with a roughly 50% reduction in HIV and hepatitis C. They also connect people with addiction treatment. CDC research finds that syringe exchange participants are about 5 times more likely to enter drug treatment and roughly 3 times more likely to stop injecting drugs than people who do not use the services. And the CDC says the exchanges prevent overdose deaths when they distribute naloxone. After 30 years of research, the CDC finds that syringe exchanges are safe, effective, and cost-saving and do not increase illegal drug use or crime. Yet Kerr County is the only place in Texas where needle exchanges are allowed. In the last legislative session, Democratic State Representative Tony Rose sought to change that.
This program will not encourage new drug use or increase drug use among existing users.
She authored House Bill 3174 that would expand the Kerr County model to Dallas, El Paso, Harris, Nueces, Travis, and Webb counties.
HIV infections rose in each of the selected counties, while rates declined in Kerr County, where there is a syringe exchange program.
It started with the sterile syringe that became a path to recovery.
Michelle Espinosa testified in favor of the bill. She told Texas lawmakers she injected drugs for more than 20 years. She repeatedly reused needles.
I once found a syringe on the railroad tracks and used it.
Eventually, after talking with needle exchange workers, Espinosa agreed to enter treatment.
It starts with a sterile syringe program, but it doesn't end there.
But the bill faced resistance from lawmakers like Republican Representative David Lowe.
Are we sending mixed messages to saying drug use is illegal and then we're providing the tools to do it?
No, what you're doing, you're providing safety. If you know that a person is going to use the drugs, don't you want it to be safe?
The Texas House passed Rose's bill, but the Texas Senate, led by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, refused to take it up, so it didn't become law. Representative Rose's office said she will try again to pass the bill in the coming legislative session. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
We continue with our look back at the talk of Texas this week. The Texas Standard's Wells Dunbar brings you now the voices of folks across the state.
Public radio is the sound of Texas in real time. It's the hum in the background that somehow knows just what matters. It's where we learn, grieve, and laugh, often all in the same hour. I'm Wells Dunbar with the Texas Standard, and when we asked listeners what keeps them tuned in, the question came at a moment when public media's future felt especially uncertain with the loss of federal funding. Looking back now, that uncertainty has only made these voices feel more poignant.
Hi there, this is Tiffany Grant, and I am a native Houstonian.
Tiffany kept Houston on the dial, even after life moved her elsewhere. Here's what she told us.
I've lived in Georgia for about 7 years now, but I still listen to Houston Public Media, and I am a contributor to them.
There's a quiet kind of loyalty in that. Not flashy, but durable, like holding on to your old cell number, the one with the hometown area code, even after life carries you somewhere else. Public radio can be the same, a tether, a reminder of where you started. Out in far west Texas, Oscar Garcia found himself tuning in for reasons both ordinary and profound. His story begins with a simple practical choice and ends with something much deeper.
I first started listening to National Public Radio when I was trying to avoid advertisements in my car. So I switched to our local station, KTEP, and immediately I appreciated the impartial tone that the journalists would take. I also wanted to highlight the Texas Standard's weekly typewriter rodeo. Sean Petrie, he wrote a couple of poems upon my request for my city after the mass shooting that occurred and after the legal case. And they were very poignant, and I felt necessary, and I made sure to share it with as many people as I could. And so I just wanted to express my gratitude for that.
People don't just listen to public radio, they weave it into the story of their lives. And over this past year, as funding fights became something more than a distant policy debate, local public media is only as strong as the people who decide it is worth keeping. If this station has meant something to you, then I think you know what to do. I'm Wells Dunbar, and this is the Talk of Texas.
You know, it's not just Texas families struggling with inflation and the rising prices of food right now. It's those food banks helping to bridge the gap. They're struggling too. We're going to hear more. Also, an emerging segment of the beverage industry growing fast but facing threats of bans and restrictions. Those stories, the week in politics with the Texas Tribune, and a whole lot more on tomorrow's edition of the Texas Standard. We're out of time for today's big broadcast, but the news continues 24/7, texasstandard.org. We'll talk again on Friday.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare. the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington Family, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation.